All right. Hello, everybody. Tara Bachland here. Good to virtually see all of you. I have a great topic and a terrific guest for today. We have Will Winter, Doctor of Veterinary Medicine, and but a broader topic in the three biggest lies in modern medicine and the paradigm shift to the new biology. Now, I'm usually pretty up on things, but even I was like, well, what's the new biology? And I go to type it in, and it's still on the forefront. It's not totally out there yet. So I love bringing new cutting edge, new thought formed type of topics. And I've gotten to know Will Winter through creating a course online through the Matthew Wood Institute of Herbalism for animal and pet health, which is his early career, of course, in veterinary medicine. He is a quick introduction. He is the co-founder of the American Holistic Veterinary Association and started his practice initially in 1981. He has some experience to share. And as he's explained before, when you're a veterinarian, you have to learn the usual stuff that most doctors learn about. And then you have to basically take another set of courses and a whole nother education in animal health. And that there's a lot of stuff that crosses over. So, let's just dive in. Just wanted to say hello, thank you. And I'm personally very excited to learn about this topic, more about this topic. I have an inkling of what we're going to be talking about, but I love new journeys like this. So let's take it away.
Thank you, Tara. That's a good introduction. There was actually another part of my career that I didn't ever tell you about, I don't think, and it's kind of related to our topic. And that was that I was for 12 years at the Kansas State University. And throughout most of that, I worked for the veterinary school before I got into vet school, during and after. And through the majority of that, I was a graduate student, or as we called it, graduate student. We did research, not any of which I'm proud of. I don't believe in animal research, but it was kind of a larval stage of my emotional and spiritual evolution. And a lot of the stuff, I feel like my work today is an atonement for all the animal experimentation that we did. And again, I was just like a little ground pounder in the process. My name was on about 100 research papers, but it wasn't the lead name. The graduate students get to put their name on the papers too, under et al. And so that was my part, but yet I understood the process of making science from A to Z. We created science, we banged it out, we generated so much scientific research, which is funny today. I'm gonna turn my phone off just so I don't get a phone call. So much of what I hear today is like, and especially if I go do a lecture on holistic medicine at a veterinary school, which I've done at 5 different vet schools, is the professors that just can't stand the fact that I'm teaching something that they can't teach or won't teach or don't know how to teach. But it's like, well, where's your scientific proof? And, it's the part of that is really interesting is like, well, let's talk about what the scientific method is. And there are some very extremely important aspects to the true scientific methodology, one of which is to have a control. And a lot of the research that's coming out today has no control. And the control means, I'm actually doing a home scientific experiment now. I'll give you an example. I've been studying structured water, water that goes through a device that structures it so that it's coherent and organized, wetter, you might say. So I have 6 flower pots full of identical soil. They're identical pots, identical number of seeds in them, and I'm watering them with an identical amount of water every day. The first pot is just tap water. The second pot goes through our Brita filter, tabletop filter. The third pot goes through our under the kitchen filter. It's not a structure unit. And then I have an analemma water wand, which has mother water in it or seed water. And when you put it in with the regular water, it structures it. It changes it so that it's like water takes on memory. So it remembers the structure of the mother water. And then I have 2 other devices that are tubes. One is just a tube about 8 inches long, and it has glass balls in it. And the water, when it goes through, is like bing, 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 bing. And when it comes out, it's more organized. And then I have another one that's a whole, could be a dairy, it could be a home farm, or it structures everything in your whole house. So it goes into your plumbing, and it's huge. It's like 30 inches long, and it's about 4 inches in diameter. But it's the same principle of the balls in it are over an inch in diameter. They're made out of Japanese glass, and they have certain metals and gemstones in them to put imprints of frequencies into the water. So my control experiment, the tap water is the control. That just is what comes out of the kitchen sink. So that's what I mean by a control. And you'd be amazed how many experiments don't have that. You'd also be amazed when you actually are a scientist or working with science, how many experiments are designed for outcome-based results. In other words, let's say a company hires you, you're a research professor at a land-grant university, which is what they want. They want somebody that's in a university position to prove that their new product works. And we had a professor one time I was exposed to, this is many years ago, but it's still true. And the only revelation of how long ago it was is the amount of money that he stated. It would be $1 million now, but he said, you give me $100,000 and I can design an experiment to prove or disprove anything you want.
Which is the suspicion when you see who's backing the studies, right? And it might be a pharmaceutical company or someone who's related in the industry, but not a true neutral party.
Absolutely. And I work with intern new graduates, mostly of veterinary school. And the first thing I do is we give them homework every week, some research papers to look at. And I've taught them, what's the first thing you look at is who funded the study, because that's going to tell you a whole lot about if it's Merck or Pfizer or some pharmaceutical company funded it. They're not going to do science on, let's say, apple cider vinegar or raw honey or some, raw milk, some of the things that we use in natural medicine, herbs, because there's no money in it, and money makes the world go around in science. So that's just one aspect of what I'm going to be talking about today is what I believe was truth. And as I'm now coming into another phase of my career, almost everything that I based my thinking on is now either being revealed as never was proven or it's been disproven. And we'll talk about some of those are going to touch nerves as we go through this session, I guarantee you, because it's very disturbing to have someone tell you what you believe is not true. That's extremely disruptive. Which, I've started the slideshow I'm going to show today with a quote by Mark Twain, but another one, and I don't think it's in the show, but he said, it ain't what you don't know that hurts you, it's what you know for sure that ain't so that's the problem. So that stuff that we knew for sure that ain't true is one of the biggest blocks in changing the paradigm, shifting the paradigm. So I'm going to see if I have the ability to switch over to some pictures. We may not do it very long, but we'll see if it's applicable. We'll stick with it. You don't have to look at my mug then. But
while you're doing that, I would like to clarify something. I'd heard the other day that really put some perspective on those who are in the research realm. And isn't it something like a person who earns their PhD, their thesis, they do maybe they might be on a couple of papers. It's only a couple from what I understood, but so in perspective, this podcast was talking about another researcher professor to be a part of over 100 papers is like doing many times doctorate type studies and research. Am I summarizing that clearly enough?
Well, yeah, but it's a little bit of apples and oranges because a doctorate and I did a lot of postgraduate work. There's a lot of statistical classes you have to take. there's a lot of classwork, like 20, 25 hours of classwork, depending on your field, that is just general information about how to write. There's also a format that's universal in all scientific articles where you have an introduction, there's methods and materials of what you did, then it goes on and it concludes with what your conclusions are. And so when you're writing that, it's blocked in to this. So like say I wrote the majority, myself and another graduate student, we were the ground pounders. So the professor, we were doing toxicology and efficacy trials for a toxic organophosphate poison. In this case, most of our studies came through that. But the professor, he was busy with other stuff. So we did the experimentation on the animals. We wrote down the results, and then we were able to, it's almost like this thing now where this chat deal where it writes papers for you, that was AI. We were those guys. And it was just almost like a chicka, 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 a machine, and you shake it out and poops out it, instead of a chicken egg, it poops out an article. So there's very little variation in all of these articles that in that case were pretty much about toxicology. We were exploring this neurotoxin, which turns out to be an unmitigated disaster of a drug. It was an insecticide. It was an organophosphate insecticide, and which works on it's a neurotoxin. And a lot of the neurological diseases people have now, whether it's ALS or MS or all the neuromuscular diseases, frequently are predicated by some type or combination of, let's say, DDT, Roundup, which is glyphosate, organophosphate insecticides, the neonicotinoids that are killing it's causing colony collapse disorder in the bees. It's just, I should say, it's one part of that collapse. There's many other factors we're finding out that are neurotoxic, but things that affect your brain. And now we have an epidemic of a new disease that really wasn't around that much until the last 25 years, which is senile dementia, also called Alzheimer's disease. And what is causing this degenerative destruction in the brains of people that are otherwise healthy? They might be a little bit old, but normally old people don't turn into vegetables like we're seeing now. And now we have this rise in memory care units, memory care facilities, and there's thousands, tens of thousands of people, maybe hundreds of thousands of people wandering around in a memory care facility. And I believe that is particularly environmental caused with the pollution that people are eating, breathing, drinking, are going through their skin. So you add up these neurotoxins and you've got a pandemic. And
sounds like a talk we could have.
What?
Sounds like a whole nother talk in and of itself.
Yeah, and it's going to color every talk that we do because it's real and it's out there and it's not going away. In fact, it's getting worse. So I like the EMF mitigation that you and I have talked about. I'm not an electrical engineer. I'm a veterinarian, but I have to understand what 5G and EMF, stray voltage, dirty electricity, what all that does to animals and of course to us. You can see I'm wearing a mitigation device right now that protects me from the screen and my cell phone. And we have a big one that protects the whole house. Farmers can get them. And speaking of farmers, some of this talk, I particularly selected these slides because they involve my realm now, which is livestock, be it a dairy or grass-fed beef, pastured pork, free-range chickens. That's the only part of livestock agriculture I am interested in at all. You couldn't really hardly make me go to a confined animal feeding operation at CAFO. Not interested in it. I don't want to eat it. I don't want to smell it. I don't want to look at it. I don't want to think about it. It's just, that's the other reality that's out there. And part of that is just strictly awareness, people's awareness. I believe if people were aware of what they're eating, where it came from, I mean, people like to be ignorant. I hate to say it, but I when I took my current job at Thousand Hills Cattle Company in 2002, I'm still there. We had a real hard time selling 100% grass-fed gourmet beef. So what we decided is every one of us would put on an apron and cowboy hat. We'd go into supermarkets and co-ops and health food stores, and we'd sit there for 4 to 6 hours with a little grill cooking beef and giving people samples. And it was really fun. It's fun to give stuff away. But we hey, would you like to try some 100% grass-fed beef? And when you're giving somebody a big old bite of juicy grass-fed beef, unless of course they're vegetarian, and a lot of the co-ops, we got smoked by militant vegans or vegetarians, and when they would tell us that, depending on what mood I was in, I'm a vegetarian. I go, hey, so are our cattle. That's not a real popular response, but like I say, you kind of get tired after a while. Yeah. But it was really interesting how many people would be walking by with their shopping cart, and in it is a big pile of junk food. And it's really fun to walk around a supermarket and just see what people eat and compare it to how they look, what their weight is and what their skin complexion is. And then you look in their cart and it's like, oh my God, if you
can still find junk food at the health store.
Yeah, absolutely. Sugar is pretty much ubiquitous in health food. So you do have to watch, but it's still better in general. So is organic. Organic is no guarantee of nutrient density, but organic means no poisons, basically. And that's still very important. My background in toxicology really drilled that into me about how important it is to look at all the hormone disruptors, endocrine disruptors, and neurotoxins. So anyway, we are still on the same topic. It sounds like we've wandered off a little bit, but it's a lot of the where I'm going with this is that a lot of things that we thought were causing illnesses, let's say heart disease, cancer, allergies, skin problems, a lot of these things we thought, there's a boogeyman out there, there's a germ that's going to get you, and that germ is causing your ailment. Well, we found out maybe that's not so true it's definitely not as true as we thought it was. So I'm just going to launch into a few slides, and then we'll see if it feels good to people. And I'm going to share my screen in theory. And
you already warned us that maybe not everything is going to feel great to everybody. So fair warning.
Yeah, exactly. It's like I get a lot of kill the messenger response of it's like those shopping carts when people are walking by with their cart of other meat, let's say, and I'm selling pure grass-fed beef, and they almost want to throw their coat over their cart. And it's really funny is, the most common response, they just look at me, I haven't even said anything yet, and they go, I know what you've got is really good. But this meat I'm getting here, my husband's family is coming, and they don't care what they eat, so we're just going to get that. But we like to get your meat. It's just really funny to see how people respond, and or they'll say, I know CAFOs are bad. I know I just don't want to hear about it. It's just like I just can't think about it. So like I say, people love being ignorant. So when you're the disruptor, it's a problem. And speaking of which, is another Mark Twain quote: if you don't read the newspaper, you're uninformed. If you do read the newspaper, like I do, you're misinformed. And that's certainly true. So I call this Three Lies, another subtitle is Ranchers Breaking Bad. And if you watch the show, you know that Breaking Bad is to go over to the dark side, even though you know better. Most often for money, but usually rationalized by the fact that, well, I'm not doing this for myself, it's for others. And that was certainly Walter White was, he had cancer and he was dying, and he was selling meth to accumulate some money for his handicapped son. Well, there you go. So here's lie or myth number one, and that is that germs are the cause of disease. And our culture got damaged about 150 years ago by Louis Pasteur, who founded and originated the germ theory of disease. And there's a lot of myths that happen about how people got sick before the microscope was invented by von Leeuwenhoek in the 1600s. They thought it was like a curse somebody put on you or some kind of superstition, but he got a microscope figured out and he could see little things moving around in there. And so then that technology just proliferated. But throughout the last 400 or 500 years, there was a lot of people that died on the surgery table because they really had no idea about, they maybe didn't even wash their hands before they went into surgery. So this is Dr. Lister. He invented the product that we all know as Listerine. But the germ theory applied to the antiseptic principles of the practice of surgery. So Louis Pasteur and Lister collaborated on that. And in this picture, can you see this picture okay?
Yeah, great.
This is Dr. Lister spraying carbolic acid around the surgeon. They're still not wearing gloves or gowns or masks or any caps or anything. But the carbolic acid was a way to kill topical germs. Dr. Pasteur passed away in 1895. He was a hero in France. He was like Brad Pitt and somebody else all rolled into one. He was really a hero, and people felt like he saved millions of lives. Like we have Honest Abe on our $5 bill, and their 5 franc note they have Louis Pasteur. So he invented what we now call pasteurization. When he did it, it's kind of interesting. What he was pasteurizing in France wasn't milk; it was wine. They had some contaminated products with wine. So they gave it to Dr. Pasteur, and he was able to cook it, ruining so much of the terroir and all of the great things about natural wine. But at least it didn't kill people as often. So yeah, so there's a lot of stuff about Dr. Pasteur. And what has happened in my world, this is a picture from England. Could have been during the hoof and mouth epidemic. It could have been during BSE, which is also known in the media as mad cow disease. And they were so phobic about these diseases that what they did is they came in and machine gunned all your animals on your whole farm. And then any neighbor that was nearby whose animals could have touched your animals, they machine gunned them too and killed them all, burnt the carcasses. It was a hideous annihilation of innocent animals. It was just, and it was in the millions. It wasn't just a few. But that was how they dealt with it. Is like, we don't know what it is, so let's just kill it. But even before that, Hippocrates, who was the father of modern medicine, he didn't believe that. And they didn't know what a germ was back in his days, 2,000 years ago. He didn't need to know. He said all disease begins in the gut. And it was so brilliant, people forgot about it for almost 2,000 years. But there was also another famous French scientist, maybe equal to Pasteur, and his name was Béchamp. And this book is called A Lost Chapter in the History of Biology. But Béchamp, he did not believe in the germ theory. And what he said is that germs or microbes are pleomorphic. And that word means they have the capacity to change not only their shape and their characteristics, but also their pathogenicity. And he believed that germs could modify themselves based on the health level of the patient. So they could actually turn into a deadly pathogen, or they could not, based on what's going on in your body. This guy was incredibly brilliant himself. And it's kind of funny, when Louis Pasteur was on his deathbed, he refuted his entire germ theory. He said, well, folks, he said, Béchamp was right. And so he refuted everything he said about the germ theory. This is what this picture is about. Béchamp says microbes change, they're pleomorphic. It's the terrain theory, terrain meaning your body. Louis Pasteur says the microbe is nothing, the terrain is everything. So 150 years later, we're still believing in the germ theory, when actually your health is related to somewhat to your heredity, certainly your environment, certainly your lifestyle, and then, positive or negative medical treatment. And this was, again, the brilliance of Hippocrates 2,000 years ago. He said it's more important to know what sort of person has a disease than to know what sort of disease the person has. And this was echoed by homeopathy. Dr. Hahnemann, who kind of invented homeopathy in the 1790s, said there are no diseases, just sick people. That's the new biology in a nutshell. And this is, again, the reality. People are fed by the food industry, which pays no attention to health, and are treated by the health industry, which pays no attention to food. That was Wendell Berry's brilliance. And Voltaire, another guy who lived in the 1700s, said, the art of medicine consists of amusing the patient while nature cures the disease. And there again, this is the new biology. So this is a book here called The 20 Steps to Perfect Health, Thugs, Drugs, and the War on Bugs. How the natural healthcare revolution will lead us past greed, ego, and scary germs. And again, with Breaking Bad, we're looking at Monsanto feeding the world's less educated. This, to me, kind of says it all. And our evolution as human beings, coming from apes, and then the de-evolution through that. I mean, it's a funny series, but boy, we're pretty close to the right side of that table. This is our government's influence. Hi, I'm Michael Taylor, former vice president for Monsanto. We poison everything you consume. And then a few years later, oh, hi, I'm Michael Taylor, deputy commissioner of the FDA. I'll protect you from people like myself, which not, it's just that's not really, he's not going to protect anybody. He's going to protect Monsanto. So that's just part of the problem. Now, on the good guys, this would be the Campaign for Raw Milk and the Weston A. Price Foundation. And Farmageddon was a movie, The Unseen War on the American Family Farms, which is going on a mega scale right now. We truly believe in raw whole milk from healthy cows like A2 casein, and not pasteurized, not homogenized, especially grass-fed cows, which you can get. There's a whole creamery called Maple Hill Creamery out of upstate New York, and everything they sell is organic. It's all 100% grass-fed. It's all A2 milk, which is the non-toxic, non-allergenic milk. And if you can find
most from Jersey cows, are there certain cow breeds that are more?
Yeah, it's more than breed, but it's parallel to breed. Most Holsteins are A1, which are the toxic milk. And that morphology changed. Nobody knows when. It could have been the 50s, 60s. But it kind of changed as they started trying to get these cows to bang out 100, 120 pounds of milk a day, which is obscene. But in doing so, they selected for the wrong kind of cow that makes this toxic casein. Whereas most of the Jerseys, most of the Guernseys, a lot of brown Swiss, Dutch Velds, a lot of these other breeds that haven't been exploited as badly, they're all A2. Interestingly, human milk is A2. So is zebra milk, giraffe milk, camel milk. It's only the A1 is only in these developed production line cows.
It's fascinating. I did an interview a couple of years ago with a camel milk distributor. Pretty fascinating stuff.
Really fascinating. I've milked a camel, which is funny because you're standing up
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and they're that high, and you can hardly see the top of their hump. It's that tall. And they're you got to be nice to camels because they're not necessarily nice to you. They'll spit on you, do all kinds of things. But camel milk is definitely a acquired taste. I tried to drink it, and my analogy is like drinking white house paint. It's so thick, but salty. But for people that have severe allergies to cow milk, it's a godsend. They can actually drink camel milk safely.
Yeah,
Okay, ready to move on to myth or lie number 2?
let's go.
And that myth is that everything, your health, your longevity, your intelligence is genetically predetermined. And that is absolutely not true. We don't even know if DNA looks like this. This is the Watson and Crick model of this spiral. And it is probably not like this. That's the new biology, that this is not really true. But you can go to mainstream media, MSM, and like Time Magazine, why your DNA is not your destiny. The new science of epigenetics reveals how the choices you make can change your genes and those of your kids. And epigenetics is everything that's not what we call genetics. It's like if you're a smoker, if you live in a crowded, smoggy area, if you're stressed, if you drink Mountain Dew, all of these things change your actual genetics. And this guy proved it. Dr. Pottinger was a TB sanitarium guy in California, and he was also a researcher. And in this sanitarium, they had a dairy, and he took 800 cats from the dairy. There's always a lot of stray cats around the dairy. And in a nutshell, he divided them up into 2 groups. 400 cats got cooked milk and like carnation condensed milk and cooked meat. And the other 400 cats got raw milk and raw meat. He did this for several generations. And what he found is that the cats that got the denatured foods started having problems. Litter size was smaller. They developed runts in every litter. Like a lot of the vitality went down. And I mean, he could have stopped right there, and that would have been a brilliant study. This is in the 20s and 30s, nobody had ever done this. But he didn't. He did something even more brilliant. He switched the groups. So if they'd been on raw food, he switched them to cooked food. And if they've been on cooked, denatured, devitalized food, they went to the raw. The interesting thing that happened is that it took a long time to get the health back. It took, in most cases, 4 generations to get their health back. But what that tells us today is that we are affected by what our parents ate and did, what our grandparents ate and did, and what our great-grandparents ate and did. Like I had a great-grandfather that was a coal miner from England. And when he came to Kentucky, he worked in a coal mine. And there was kind of a lung weakness in me when I was a child, and it manifests throughout most of my years until I was treated by a homeopathic doctor that got rid of these epigenetic, what are called miasms in homeopathy. He gave me a homeopathic medicine, and I basically had the vibrational frequency of tuberculosis. Even though I had never even seen a coal mine, much less been in one, I had a little bit of miner's lung. So that's what that was about. And this is Dr. Pottinger's Sanitarium in Monrovia, California. Beautiful place.
Is it syphilis that is one of those diseases that there are known congenital symptoms in the offspring? They don't have syphilis, but isn't it their fingernails or their fingers are a different shape?
Syphilis and gonorrhea are 2 major miasms that millions of people have from generations past who actually had the disease. So yeah, a miasm is a cloud on your DNA, and each cloud is shaped differently. So if your ancestors had syphilis, you can get a whole bunch of symptoms from that, and the only way to really relieve it is homeopathy is, to me, the only way that actually undoes that cloud. And certainly eating right and having a good healthy lifestyle, like the cats, will work it out of you. But your kids could have something that that is passed down from your grandparents. So this is just more about this the real food. And there are books like on the right there, Gray Graham is a guy I've met, and it's called Pottinger's Prophecy from Dr. Pottinger. And he said how food resets genes for wellness and illness. And then this book on the left, The New Evolution Diet, what our Paleolithic ancestors can teach us about weight loss, fitness, and aging. And this predecesses the paleo diet. And again, this is just about epigenetics. I'm going to go past a little bit of this, and about lifestyle. And this again is another, I love these charts that show the evolution or de-evolution of our species. But yeah, so, and we can undo so much of what's called genetic. Here's another example of epigenetics. That baby is smoking her cigarettes, or if she has a few cocktails, that baby is drunk. And it's not genetic, but that baby could be born with all kinds of things. We have fetal alcohol syndrome, we have crack babies. Those are hideous, permanent damages that are not genetic. And they estimate, like with cancer, you hear a lot about, well, you know, my mom had breast cancer, and therefore it's probably genetic, and they've isolated a bunch of genes. Totally isn't true at all. Only maybe 5%, and that 5% is getting smaller every day, of all cancer is considered genetic. So that's one of the lies. This is epigenetics. This rabbit has this pattern that he would be a white rabbit in a different temperature if he's exposed to a different temperature. Siamese cats are this way. There's several other animals. So how modern biology is rewriting our understanding of genetic disease and inheritance. And this is also another study of agouti mice that have been bred to, they have an ability to metabolize certain things, including methylating the DNA. And it can either shut off a gene or activate it, things like this. So pregnant mothers can either produce a standard baby or brown babies based on how they're fed. And this is where I've said on here, only 5% of cancer is related to heredity, and we're thinking less. Adding folic acid to the diet of pregnant mice alters their offspring's gene expression. These two mice are genetically identical. The one on the right has had folic acid. The other one on the left cannot process this pathway for these vitamins, and so he's got an illness, and his coat color is different. So this again is what's happening to our culture now with our diet and our weight. It's an epidemic. And then here is Dr. Richard Ulrey. He's a chiropractor from Michigan, a holistic chiropractor, and he wrote a book called Minerals for the Genetic Code. And he realized that we can, by getting certain vitamins, we can change our genetic code, or if we lack them, we can change it. So here's myth number 3, and that is that you can vaccinate your way to health. And this is what I learned. This is what I was taught. And Hippocrates, again, I go back to this guy all the time. And one of the modern people that kind of founded the term new biology was Dr. Tom Cowan. And he has a website. If you look up just drtomcowan.com, you'll be able to get on board with this movement. And I heard him say, paradoxically, this new biology is eerily reminiscent to the biology that grounds ancient healing practice. So here we go. Here's this guy. Give me a fever and I can cure any ailment. A fever simply means that the process of healing is speeding up, and because the fever is regulated by the body as part of self-protection mechanisms, it rarely reaches a hazardous level. A basic fever caused by something means the immune system is working its best, most animals, certainly vertebrates, respond to illness with a fever. And animal studies show when their fevers are blocked, they're much more likely to die. So what does modern medicine do? Whoa, yeah, we just treat the symptoms. So fever, aspirin, fever, reduce it. So here we are reducing what is actually trying to help us with. And of these things, I like to take things to the extreme, like religious things. The first sacrament is vaccine. And we have, even our government is helping us get addicted to these chemical crutches that may or may not do anything. And children, it's the worst in children. They a lot of times are poking needles in them when they're still wet from being born. They're already jabbing them. And, it's like, I think there's 72 vaccines every kid is required to get before they turn 18. I came up with this drawing somebody made. This is probably 15 years ago. I saw this, but it was like how vaccine is made, and you can see what's going in it. You got mercury going in, like polio virus, cancer virus, squalene, nerve disease. All this is stirred by Dr. Doom or Dr. Fauci in creating this toxic brew that people are going to have injected into their bloodstream or into their body, not even having a clue what's in it. The first vaccine was Dr. Jenner with smallpox. They found out back then that people live very close to their livestock. If you've ever been to Europe, it's not uncommon in Germany or Sweden or Denmark to find that the barn and the house are the same building. They're just half and half. So people live with their livestock. Yeah, very, very common. And and if they live close to cattle, they were exposed to cowpox, and they therefore they were immune to smallpox. So, and again, this thinking is changing about what smallpox is. And again, it's changing according to the thought that Dr. Beauchamp came up with, that organisms are pleomorphic. And when the Native Americans mostly died of Guns, Germs, and Steel is the book that brought this out, that we triumphed over the Native Americans by our guns, our germs, and the steel railroads destroyed that country, wiped out the bison practically. But yeah, so this was in 1796, he came up with it. This is for beef cattle. This is just this, I won't go through it all, but this is all, blackleg, tetanus, lepto, botulism, tick fever, all of these things that they're required to do. And this is even worse when you're getting a what's called a multivalent vaccine, where most of these are called 7 ways or 5-way, where you're technically giving the animal 7 diseases at the same instant. So, how many times have you ever had 7 diseases at the same time, which is what your body thinks happened? The second sacrament of this, the new old medicine, is chemical wormers. And again, this is unmitigated disaster on the farm. We're killing the dung beetles, we're killing the soil livestock, we're killing the animals with these mostly nerve poisons. And with the one on the left there, well, actually both of them, this is a poron, which you pour down the spine of the animal. And there was a guy named Mark Purdy, who was a dairy farmer in England, and he got wiped out twice by the government. First for foot and mouth disease, they destroyed his herd, and then he recovered, and then BSE broke out, which the press calls mad cow, and he had his herd destroyed again. And he said, this is insane, this is not happening. And he actually figured out the mechanisms of how the organophosphate poisons that were used to eradicate screwworms all across Europe was actually setting them up for nerve disease. And it's a beautiful concept. However, the press did not grasp it at all. The media loves simple. They love boogeyman gonna get you. And the good guys will give you a vaccine to protect you from the boogeyman. That everybody understands, and that's why this germ disease theory is so hard to kill because it's so simple. It's just germs bad, doctors good. But what he found out is this organophosphate neurotoxin was poured down the spine. And we actually have the documents with what they used. They actually doubled the dose of this. Just, if a little's good, a lot's better. I never thought the government would believe that. Most farmers believe it. But they hit them up with this product that damaged their nervous system. And if you understand about how nerves work, there is copper in the nerve elements, and copper works just like the wiring of this computer or your house. Copper conducts electricity. Well, what they found out is this organophosphate blocked the copper, and it created some buildup of other things like lithium and several other elements, manganese, and when this is where it gets off the rails. Then when certain triggers caused the stored electricity that wasn't being transmitted, it destroyed it, it released it in bursts. And the burst would blow holes in your brain. And that's the encephalopathy that accrued from bovine, the so-called mad cow, BSE. And the triggers for it, there were two main ones. One was the Concorde supersonic jet. When it flew from Paris to London or Paris to New York, everybody underneath it got a blast of the sonic boom. And the sonic boom released this nervous energy and destroyed their brains. And the epidemiologists have tracked wherever the Concorde flew, underneath it, there was this epidemic of mad cow, or scrapie in sheep, or chronic wasting in deer, or Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease in humans. It was the same disease that was an environmental disease. So they had to come up with something. There's never been anything isolated as far as a boogeyman germ. So it's those dang prions. Those prions are getting screwed up. That's a part of the brain. So then they had to make it infectious. Oh, you can't eat deer, you can't eat spinal cords, got to throw that meat away. Can't eat cattle that are over 30 months old because you might get the boogeyman. So a whole billions and billions of dollars have been wasted over the fact that they try to make it an infectious disease. So, and again, worming is a god-awful thing, spraying it on. They put it in the rubbers. It's very likely that in that oil, there's toxic things. A lot of farmers, and I grew up with this, we used tractor crankcase oil to put on our cattle for flies. And if you know anything about heavy metals and used oil, and people change their tractor oil about every 10 years, whether it needed or not. So it was this black gumbo stuff with all this poison in it. And then of course we ate the meat. It's a miracle sometimes you look at some of this stuff, how we're alive.
What was that last picture? What was on the back?
That is a fly repellent rubber. And that's the picture you mean?
Yep.
We put these out with oil in it. It's very common. It's called a back rubber. We have natural, 100% organic, safe, herbal fly repellents that we can put right in the same piece of apparatus and get all the flies off of them without using any poisons. But I would say 80-90% of the farmers use nasty, dreadful poisons for this application because they hate flies, and they should.
So this is suspended between two poles, and either.
Yeah, there's all different kinds. You can use a canvas flap over the mineral hopper. There's all different ways. You can spray it on. You can, let them doctor themselves.
Okay, so they know to do that, or you just put it in their waste.
Oh yeah, they find out real quick.
I've grown up in the country my whole life, but I have not seen that, although I don't spend all my time on farms either.
Okay, well, it's out there. This again, fogging a chicken or pig house. This poor guy, they've obviously never told him what he's breathing in, even though he's probably got a mask or respirator on. he's breathing in these deadly poisons.
Yeah.
And this was DDT in World War II. When I was a kid, the trucks came by fogging our streets, and us little kids would run behind the fogging truck and play in the fog. We thought it was really funny. But again, it's probably now pretty much everybody agrees that was the roots of the polio epidemic, was DDT. Polio is a nerve toxin, and polio is, among other things, it destroys your spinal cord.
That
And
DDT is the nerve toxin?
DDT is a neurotoxin. Terrible. That's how it kills insects like mosquitoes. They're more sensitive to it. And of course, the most sensitive of all are the amphibians. They breathe in things through their skin. So it's rare to find frogs now and newts and things like that, because they're dying off. There's a massive die-off of so many species. Honeybees are also very sensitive to poisons, and they're dying like crazy. This is soil livestock. This is down in Texas. This is a couple dung beetles. Can you see them moving that ball of dung?
Yeah.
What they do is, so flies can't breed in the manure, we have these dung beetles that take it underground, and they lay their eggs in it, and they live on it. But after the cow poops, maybe an hour later, it's gone. But you won't hardly find a farm in Wisconsin or Minnesota or the Dakotas that has any of these big dung beetles left.
That's
So
just amazing. I mean, it's nature's way of getting those nutrients back into the soil, like literally into the soil.
yeah, they do. They build the soil. So the last sacrament of modern medicine is antibiotics. 80% of all antibiotics used are used on factory farm animals. And in fact, this is one of the things that irks me about my own profession. You could not have a CAFO without veterinarians, because if you took all their drugs away, they would all die immediately, because they're living in a hellhole, and all of them. And so we have abetted so much animal cruelty with lab animals. Again, there's nothing you can learn with a lab animal experiment, nothing. With factory farms, racehorses, it's just like my profession is involved in almost every form of animal abuse. This is, again, just what consumers should know about antibiotics. You can find this on the internet, but just how much antibiotic is in foods. And this is where the antibiotics do their most damage. This is the health of your digestive tract. The healthy part on the top there is 80% good guys in your gut, and 20% could be E. coli, salmonella, listeria, campylobacter, some of the so-called deadly pathogens. Well, if you know anything about war, if you have 4 times more people on one side, they're probably going to win the war. That's what they do. But down below, it's 80% bad bacteria, and the pathogens overwhelm the good guys. So this is about what we're trying to do is get rid of, so this is, again, Breaking Bad. Sorry, I have to cop to some of this with media. Again, here's got the respirator and goggles and a little bit of protection, but he's polluting the world around him. Farming before and after Monsanto. This is pretty much literal. And then we have a lot of good presidents that are lobbyists for these people. And even though they do farm washing, which is a way to make it sound like, oh yeah, Marlboros, that's farm ranchers smoke Marlboros, therefore it's good. Or the Dodge truck, so God made a farmer. They used some of this stuff to sell Dodges. I always say, thanks, Jesus, for this food. Jesus says, hey, de nada. That's the farm workers. So that's, again, that's the bad news. We have a lot of options that is, again, part of the new biology. This is Percy Smizer, a farmer in Canada whose fields were contaminated with Roundup Ready canola. And he spent his whole year perfecting beautiful non-GMO canola. One day he looked out in his field, there's a bunch of guys out there in trench coats with a government car, and they're snipping some of his canola, taking it to the lab, and they found out that it was contaminated from pollen drift from GMO canola, and he got arrested for stolen property. They said, you stole Monsanto property. And this guy's life was wrecked because he could never grow good canola again.
It's amazing documentary. Amazing. The documentary on Percy Schmeiser is pretty amazing. I mean, you're doing a really quick, great wrap up. I mean, there's weeks and weeks and months of research and information here. I mean, if any of this information piques anyone's interest, if you got past the point of being ticked off,
yeah. That's the first step.
Yes. Because there's so much behind this. I mean, you must present this to people who are already fairly familiar with this information.
Well, we're trying to reach as many people as possible. And, Carl Jung, the famous psychoanalyst, said something, the only plaque on my whole office wall, it says, there's no coming to consciousness without pain. And if everybody's fat and happy, they're just going to continue drinking their Mountain Dew, smoking their Marlboros, eating at McDonald's. And then, what do you mean I have cancer? It's like, so yeah, so a lot of this is waking up. And this is, for farmers, this book, Everything I Want to Do is Illegal, is really an amazing book. And I'm going to close with this. This is a guy in the 50s named Ira Allison, who was called the Miracle of the Ozarks. And he was arrested for false health claims. And what happened in reality, he treated people with the hideous diseases of the day. They didn't have much in the way of heart attacks, strokes, or cancer back then. But people still died of TB and brucellosis. So he treated those so-called untreatable people, which, by the way, as a side note, this is what the Mayo Clinic was predicated on. It was founded by two brothers from Ireland, the Mayo brothers. And what they did, they were famous for having a raw milk fasting therapy hospital. And you would go down there and you would drink actually 7 or 8 quarts of raw, unpasteurized, unhomogenated A2 milk a day, and not anything else, which goes along with the fact that milk is the only pure food that you can live on the rest of your life, raw milk, and never eat anything else and live to be a full 80, 90, 100 years of age. No other food will enable you to do that. If you pasteurize it or even homogenize it, you can't do that. But this guy was treating people naturally. Nobody died that he worked on. There were no complaints, but he was a burr under the saddle of modern medicine. He cured thousands of people with simple mineral cocktails. So he didn't get the Nobel Prize. He got arrested. And I think I have his recipe. This is the legal proceedings. They arrested him, fined him, and made sure that he could never treat another person again. This is in the 50s. And this is what he used, and this is what we can use today to make sure our zinc intake is adequate. That's what he used. Zinc is so important for the immune system, the T cells, the killer cells. He used cobalt, cyanocobalamin, which is B12, vitamin B12. So he used cobalt. He used copper, which is critical. It's great for parasites. We have to make sure, like our cattle, I've created a product that has 5,000 parts per million copper and several different forms of copper. But we have to get enough copper in them. And then he used manganese, which you never hear anything about manganese. Well, yeah, it's really important for superoxide dismutase, for cartilage formation. Think about how many people have cartilage damage. Parallel to him was Randall A. Farm, which became Carnation Dairy later. But this was their mineral and herb formula that all the cattle got. They also, in the winter, when the cattle were being milked, they were under huge ultraviolet lamps to give them, to activate their vitamin D. So this was just an amazing thing that they figured all this out. But Dr. Allison, this is his formula. He would give them this cocktail. And I read this red part in a book called Grass, The Forgiveness of Nature by Charles Walters. And he interviewed farmers that had survived the epidemics of the 30s. And I love this term, they said they fed brucellosis out of their herds. And there was a big full-page spread in the Minneapolis Tribune Sunday about the Yellowstone bison herd. They're trying to kill them. The government wants to kill them all because they have brucellosis and they could be carriers for TB. This ignorant deal of like anything you don't understand, you just kill it. So rather than mineralize these buffalo, they're not getting any minerals, and that land is depleted. So then they can't migrate like they used to get minerals from the mineral licks and the salt licks. So they're stuck there. They can't get it. So of course they're going to be vulnerable to brucellosis or TB. All they'd have to do is feed it out of those herds. But nope. They're going to eradicate them if they can get a chance. And this is again an article I cut out years ago. Bison slaughter to continue. Vaccine plan is too costly. Oh yeah, we can't do that. So again, all this stuff we're talking about goes on today. There's Grass, The Forgiveness of Nature, something that all farmers should read. And yeah, I think this is the end of it here. Yeah, I'm not going to go into homeopathy or some of these other things, just because there are so many tools that we have. And I'll see if I can stop the screen share. And
didn't buffalo migrate on their own to go to mineral sources?
They used to when they could.
Did they just instinctively knew to seek out those minerals?
I'm going to get rid of screen sharing.
I stopped it for you.
Okay, very good. Oh, you did. Okay.
There's the three myths, but isn't there, I have a feeling that there's that's part one. Isn't there a part two? So what is the new biology then?
Okay.
If those are the myths. And I mean, there's so much we could go into there, but if we start talking about all that, I have a feeling we never get to the new biology part.
Well, this is the new biology part. And the old biology is predicated on the germ theory, the faulty germ theory, the faulty genetic theory, and then the theory of what a cell is still controversial. So there's a lot about that. So, and then most of the things that I hate to say old because we like the really old stuff, but what people are being exposed to now is all based on either unproven or disproven hypotheses that are turning out to not be true. And I'll give you several examples. And again, I want to refer everybody to Dr. Tom Cowan, Cowan. He's the guy that coined the term new biology. And his stuff is absolutely brilliant. It's absolutely shocking. It's absolutely controversial. It will absolutely make it hard for you to sleep at night. It's so wild. But a couple of things I'll give you. He's a full tilt medical doctor, practiced for 20 years in a holistic practice in San Francisco, decided to reject his medical license because they don't understand holistic medicine. They don't only understand conventional medicine. So he said, the heck with you. So he moved to upstate New York. He's got a herb farm. He's got, they do a whole bunch of stuff, but he wrote several books, and you'll find these books. But one of his controversial theories that is actually more than theory, everybody knows what caused a heart attack, right? Right? It's a myocardial infarction is the name of it. And an infarction means a blood clot in your coronary artery. You have a blood clot. And then your heart can't get oxygen, can't get blood, and you either die or you get a stent. Well, what he found out is that if a lot of people are shoveling snow or baling hay, They fall over, they're dead before they hit the ground. When they do an autopsy on those people, only about 14% have a blocked coronary artery. But if you have cardiac pain, someone catches you, gets you to the hospital, you get there and they doctor you for a while, and let's say you live 2 or 3 days, but you still die. About 95% of those people have a myocardial infarction. They actually have a blood clot in a coronary artery. So in other words, there's more to it than just that. So he came up with what's called the myogenic theory of heart attacks. And myogenic means it's related to lactic acid buildup. And lactic acid buildup is what happens to people running a marathon. They're not getting enough oxygen to keep up with this massive amount of running. So they go into anaerobic metabolism. And in anaerobic metabolism, you build up lactic acid. And what happens, you get a cramp. You get a cramp and you can't run. You have to stop and let the metabolism catch up. Well, what's the only muscle in the body that can't cramp?
Yeah, or you're in trouble.
The heart. Yeah, the heart. So that's a whole new revelation to this. And he's got an amazing discovery of an herb called strophanthus, which is an African herb called something like the herb of the gods. But for people that are prone to heart attacks or who have had a heart attack, he really does not want them to get a stent. He wants them to do this thing that opens up the heart and more than just vascular. He's completely opposed to the lipid hypothesis, which Dr. Ancel Keys came up with, who happened to live about a half a mile from me until he died at 99 and a half. But Ancel Keys was a researcher. He came up with K rations, which every GI hated. But he also came up with the lipid hypothesis. He went around the world, over 20 countries, and measured what they ate versus the incidence of heart attack. Well, in the book called the Cholesterol Myth, this I can't remember what nationality this guy is. I can never pronounce his name, but it's called the Cholesterol Myth. This book, he proved that Dr. Keys fudged his books. So he when he put a graph, the XY graph of how much fat you eat versus whether you get a heart attack, the dots were what we call in research a starry night. There were just dots everywhere. So he picked the 7 countries where the dots lined up, where the more fat they ate, the more they had a heart attack. And it was really hokey because in the 50s, in a lot of countries, they don't even call them heart attacks. So you would really have no idea what that person actually died of. So it was faulty data from the get-go. So then we got this whole statin drug industry, and statin drugs actually destroy CoQ10, the major enzyme that runs a muscle. And it's got so many side effects. It does nothing to reduce the incidence of heart attacks. But every doctor in the United States is required by law to give every patient with high cholesterol, among other things, like a low-fat diet, which is total unrelated. That study was done on rabbits, and rabbits have a different fat metabolism, and it's completely different than ours. So if you take, let's say, a 70, 80-year-old woman and lower her cholesterol artificially with statins to her total cholesterol below, let's say 200, that woman is going to get dementia because the fat is in the brain. The brain is about 60% fat, and that fat is required as an insulator for the nerves. So, and that was another part of the new biology, is how nerves work. We're all taught that when you send a message, it goes through the nerve and the end of the axon, it transfers the message via cholinesterase and various other neurotransmitters to another nerve. And Dr. Cowan did this. He had us all hold up our finger. He said, okay, lower your finger, raise your finger, lower your finger, raise your finger. So he's telling us how many nerves that has to go from your brain to tell your finger what to do. It doesn't work. It cannot work that way. So what he proposed as another theory of how nerves work is that the nerve is a tube, like a pipe, and it's got a protein membrane around it. You can look at a nerve, you can see this, cut it in half, and the majority of the nerve is fat. It's got fat in it, and then there's this little tiny corridor where the electrons go through it. It's like a wire with good insulation. And when that insulation is damaged, you're in big trouble. But it doesn't work with synapses like we've been told. It's instantaneous. I can tell my finger what can do. You watch a piano player or guitarist, and the nerves are going like this. So these the transmissions are stronger than muscle memory for delicate movements like that. So that is one example of the myth. He's got one now that I haven't wrapped my head around about the theory of cancer. And what he's saying is that we are told that cancer cells multiply. Let's say you have one cell that goes sideways and it becomes a mutant. And that mutant cell then reproduces, and pretty soon those mutant cells take over. He said that isn't how it works at all. Because if you look at the way cells divide, it's called mitosis. So we have 23 chromosomes, and those chromosomes double, and there's a spindle between them, and then they divide. Well, the way they diagnose cancer cells is you don't have 23, you have this hodgepodge in there. And it happens to be a hodgepodge that can't multiply. So what he's proposing is that cancer cells, the ones we say, oh, that's cancer, are actually being excreted by the body because they can't reproduce. So again, this is new biology. This is a whole new way to look at cancer. And we still have a lot of carcinogens. We still have all that. He started a lot of his thinking with water because the body is 70% water. And of the molecules in the body, 99% of our molecules are H2O, they're water. And he said, so if we're 60, 70% water, he worked as an ER doc for 4 or 5 years. And he said, see somebody come in, their hands cut off or their leg. He said, I never once saw water pouring out of their arm or their leg. Well, why not? Because if we're 70% water, why wouldn't water just run out of our body when we cut off an extremity? Well, he figured out the fourth state of water, that water, there's normally considered 3 states: gas, which is steam, frozen, which is ice, or liquid, which is water. There's a 4th state called a gel, and that gel is what determines our overall health. And that gel, that matrix, is created by certain frequencies, mostly EMF, electromagnetic frequencies. And it's EMF that makes my finger do what my brain is telling it, just the speed of light, faster than light.
That implying that within your body, you're creating your own EMF to send those signals. It's not the actual wiring.
Your own EMF makes everything work, electromagnetic frequency.
So hence why you might feel someone's presence, how we feel an aura, or someone maybe coming up behind us, they have their own EMF field. And so you can sense, someone there.
And that's either coherent, which means you have an immediate warmth and liking to that person. Like when I met you, I felt that immediately, and John and Matt Wood and other people. There are other people that you, before they even say anything or anything, maybe you're not even looking at them, just their presence is like, ew.
Yeah.
So that's a discordant, non-harmonic, non-coherent connection of these energies. And they can be measured out to 15 feet and probably go beyond that. We can measure it for 15 feet, the emanations that are coming off of any living thing. And it's mostly coming from your heart. The heart puts out 5,000 times more vibes than your brain, and it's projecting out of your body. And that's our life force. The Chinese call it qi. In homeopathy, it's the vital force. And there's a lot of different names for it. But that's our vitality. And this is part of the new biology, is to look at vibrational frequencies. Yeah. And we find that when we structure water, everything works better and we don't get sick. So part of the new biology is that all illness is related to the gel coming out of the gel state, getting too liquefied or too congested. That's what disease consists of. And then I mentioned pleomorphism, that we don't get a germ, we make a germ out of these things. I was very lucky. At one time, I was able to go to Canada to meet with Dr. Gaston Nassines, and he was called the Galileo of the microscope. The guy that wrote The Secret Life of Plants wrote a book called the Galileo of the microscope, and this is Dr. Nassines, and he was French, and he had to move to Quebec because he got evicted because he was a holistic doctor. But he worked for Zeiss Laboratories. This is during World War II, and he was exposed to the Germans. He was working in a German laboratory that invented the most powerful microscope in the world. And this is a light microscope. This is not electron microscope. This is the standard microscope. But this one is so clear, he could see little moving particles in every living thing. And he called them plasmatids, I think, or somatids. He called them somatids. And these are what he decided was the universal particle of life. So when you make a Staphylococcus aureus or you make an E. coli, you are actually building that pathogen out of the somatids. So he figured all that out back a long time. He's still alive. I think he's still alive. I went up to visit him, and he would take a blood sample from you, and he would project it up on a big screen from the microscope, and he could look at your somatids and tell you whether you have cancer, or, whether you're gonna die, all these things. So this book, the Galileo of the Microscope, is really a good story. And I guess the other thing, I mentioned it earlier, but all neurological diseases, like there's a syndrome my mother-in-law has, and I know two other people where they lost their sense of smell and their sense of taste, gone. And, the first thing people do is boogeyman got you, COVID. Well, it's not. It's a neurotoxin. And same is true of MS, Lou Gehrig's. All of these neurological diseases are exposure to neurotoxins that have rendered your nerves unable to work properly. So it's the same as the mad cow or Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. It's all these polio. They're all disruptions of this sacred geometry with the water molecule, the crystal. And if you get on the internet about structured water, you're going to want to buy a structured unit immediately, and everything you drink should be structured water. And then the last thing, I guess we should wrap it up, is probably I saved the best for last. And that is there's no such thing as a virus. It doesn't matter. COVID, HIV, you name any influenza, the viruses have never been shown to exist. And this is one that Dr. Cowan and Andrew Kaufman and Sam Bailey and her husband have gone on the line with their reputation. That is very important for people to understand. There is no virus. And this multi-billion-dollar lockdown that we suffered through, and wearing face diapers, and all of this crazy stuff, and then allowing people to inject God knows what, messenger RNA, it could be squalene, it could be various other things that we have no idea. And again, a multi-billion-dollar scam over no virus. And if you take just two things, let's say, let's just pick the creation of glyphosate. Glyphosate is in Roundup. It's everywhere. You can take any person around the world and take a blood sample, and you will find traces of glyphosate in their blood. Glyphosate, the main mode of action, you can't breathe. You can't get oxygen. It doesn't matter how much you're exposed to. You'd be in an oxygen tent breathing 100% oxygen, makes you worse. You still can't get it. The other thing that does that is man-made EMF, which is not coherent. It's not harmonious with us. It's not like the electrical currents that God gave us, the North Pole, South Pole, the ley lines. That is harmonious. We need it. And that's what the butterflies use. Little monarch butterfly in Minneapolis can find South America using that GPS. Birds can migrate thousands of miles. Whales use it. The bees use it to find their hive. When we take 1 billion times more man-made EMF, it scrambles everything. And the other thing it does, it makes it unable for us to assimilate oxygen properly. So you just take those two things, glyphosate and man-made EMF, which is 5G, various other satellites, Doppler radar, cell phone towers, high tension power lines. You put all that together and you've got an epidemic. You've got a pan epidemic. You don't need to invent an imaginary virus. You've got plenty going on. So that again is a big proponent of the new biology, is that the germ theory, it died with Louis Pasteur. It's not appropriate anymore to say you got a boogeyman germ. It's not appropriate to invent some kind of weirdo jab to stop a non-existent virus, an imaginary virus. And this is, again, it's extremely hard for anybody to swallow. My whole life my career has been predicated on distemper, rabies, panleukopenia, all these various diseases, that most of which are viral, quote unquote. That's not what it was. And I didn't use a lot of vaccine in my small animal practice. I had to use rabies vaccine because the law required me to, but I was on the down low for everything. I wouldn't do that if I were you, even though that's the bread and butter for all small animal veterinarians. And then in my large animal practice now with grass-fed beef, pastured pork, free-range poultry, none of these animals get vaccine in my control. And I will qualify that immediately with the fact that I have to get their lifestyle, their genetics, their mineral supplements, their vitamin supplements, nutrient density of their food, get that all in order first. We don't do organic by default. We don't just pull away the chemical crutches, because you'll have a train wreck. A lot of animals are kept alive artificially with antibiotics and wormers and things like that. So you have this genetic junk that's breeding more what I call drug addicts. I call animals that can't live without their drugs drug addicts. To me, that's what they are. So we do that first, then we remove the chemical crutches. And I've been doing that full-time since 1999. And we have these healthy herds. At Thousand Hills Cattle Company, we have about 62 producers, and close to 60 of them. There's a couple of new ones that they've not made it through the transition yet. They don't have any drugs on their farm. They don't have any of those three sacraments on their farm. And they have the healthiest animals, bless you, the kind that you want to eat, when that day comes. So yeah, I'm excited. I'm thrilled. I'm blown away by the magnitude of this new biology, that it's disrupting everything I used to believe was facts, and find out that what you know for sure ain't necessarily so. And it just is more and more revelation every day.
It's really a lot to, even someone who's familiar with all these components, it's a lot to take in. And I'd like to ask some questions to kind of peel back the layers, so that people who maybe it's totally new don't have to go through a health crisis to hopefully start seeing these things. First thing that came to mind. So to emphasize again, we're talking about something I was thinking of the other day is like what you illustrated earlier in your slides, is that we've gone through these evolutions of thought, right? But it's been so long that we've been in the germ theory, and we're still like reveling in it. We're still like just in awe over it. But like you had mentioned, or it used to be hundreds and hundreds of years ago that they knew for some reason that to not build a town by that lake, because it had a spirit that didn't like them, and it didn't suit people, or it was had some kind of evil spirit. And then so that the germ theory, then it seems like we have evolved. As our technology and our minds have evolved, so have our theories. And we can see it in our technology these days, where we have, all this AI. We are primed and ready for a new way of thinking. But when you're on the cusp, it seems crazy.
Yeah, it sure does. and you will be arrested. You would, in the past, you would be crucified or tortured to death for having heretic theories that didn't fit with the current paradigm. So I guess we're lucky, although there's at least 14 holistic doctors that we can document that died under mysterious circumstances in the last 10 years. Just, something happened. I mentioned Mark Purdy, the dairy farmer in England. His veterinarian who believed the theory, brakes went out on his truck. He went over a cliff and died. His lawyer had a very similar weird accident where something exploded and he died. And Mark Purdy had death threats. He had bombs. He was shot at. He lived under an alias in another country for years because his death was threatened. So yeah, it's a very dangerous time. It's like Galileo, was tortured. The Copernicus was tortured because the church was after them because they, everybody thought the earth was the center of the universe and everything spun around us. But when they revealed it's not true, they were crucified or killed. Majority of them were destroyed like that. So it's still going on. The powers that be are very, very invested in not rocking the boat. And believe me, with the $1 trillion industry of the COVID, there's people who they always say it's impossible to change the mind of a person whose income depends on not understanding it.
Yeah.
And that's your virologist today. What a joke of a career to say you're a virologist, that you believe in unicorns and fairies that don't exist.
So
maybe unicorns and fairies.
Well, it's like like I mentioned, the double slit experiment proved that they can be both, right? It depends on how you're looking at it. It could be a particle or a wave. Yeah, and so it's when was that experiment?
Well, it was based on Einstein's theory of relativity, that particles and waves transfer all the time, energy. It's all different forms of energy.
I'm trying to look at, it says 1927, Davison and Germer demonstrated that electrons show the same behavior. So let's assume at a quick reference that it was 1927. So this would be the early experiments that started getting us to think differently from just a purely physical world. Whereas before, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, it was a spirit. It was there's a demon in that water. And whereas once the germ theory took hold, if you started saying there's a demon in that water, that person started looking like they were crazy. Sure. And so like in the subtitle of this talk, in 10 years, is the old germ theory going to sound crazy? Like, that was back in the day when we used to believe in germ theory. But I think what is very interesting are these turning points, right? It's the turning point that is more challenging, and it's like human growth. It's that period where you have to work out and tear the muscle in order to make it grow. And then once you have the great muscles, you're like, yeah, that was no problem. That was awesome. And you're thinking you're really cool. And we forget about that transition process. The other thing I'd like to cover is just a few presuppositions, because to get to this point of thinking, it's assuming that people have these presuppositions already established. And so this would have been one of the early ones, right? If you believe in the slit experiment, that a thing could be a particle or a wave, that's already setting your mind for this presupposition to set you up for perhaps these other things could be true. And so I'm not trying to convince anyone. I'm actually just kind of trying to provide some of the underlying information that might help. So another one is that our body is electric. You alluded to it, talking about the nerves and so forth. And then also the prions were they the cause of these I'm having a hard time saying that.
That's a tricky word, yeah.
Encephalopathies. That is a tough one. But also there's an underlying theory, whether you believe in that your body is an electric thing and that your muscles actually generate electricity. They're also capacitors. And so hence why you could have that burst of energy stored and then all of a sudden it comes out and creates a problem. That's a presupposition that one would need to be aware of, that's a possibility. I think it's still not commonly understood, even though we use electrical devices or measure the electrical frequencies in our brains, or for example, that I still think it is often missed that we are electrical beings.
Yeah. And our thoughts and various other things affect that electrical frequency. We can change those frequencies with our thoughts, that we can rebuild our body, we can give ourselves cancer, we can cure ourselves of cancer, sometimes just with our thoughts. Thoughts are proud. In Chinese medicine, I studied traditional Chinese medicine, and the typical American thinks it's the needles, in Chinese medicine. It's like, guy's got a martini and a cigarette. It's like, hey, give me them needles. I need some acupuncture. Well, that's the fourth most powerful thing in Chinese medicine. And the most powerful thing is your thoughts in traditional Chinese medicine. Your thoughts affect everything. Then comes herbs, diet, and then last would be the needles in the acupuncture meridian. We get it all backwards. Americans just want hey, what you got for this? So a big part of it now is going to be taking responsibility for your own health, and people hate that in general. We all do. We want to be a victim. We want, oh yeah, I was walking down the street and a garbage truck ran over me. Well, and nowhere in that is like, well, what were you doing walking in the street? Or other accidents or other problems of so we have to back it all up. And we actually don't have any choice, because modern medicine is broke, and it's going to be really broke in our lifetime, where you're not going to have access. Poor people don't have access to good medicine already. Before long, it's just not going to be enough to go around, except for maybe the billionaires.
Well, and then also not just getting broke, but out of solutions. I think every person, when they have a health issue and there are no longer solutions, they reach a dead end, you have to find another way.
Yeah.
Another presupposition you're mentioning it is the epigenetics, and I think what is rarely considered is genetic. We think that cancer, for example, is genetic, but why isn't it a thought disease? That you will learn how to think and be in a certain way. We've all experienced it. I think like you go home for the holidays and you're like, oh, I got that feeling again, and anytime if you've spent time away from people that maybe you grew up with, and then you go back and you're like, ask your spouse, do I act like that? Do I sound like that? And so how is that any different epigenetically?
And a lot of people live in those toxic patterns. And if you read that about epigenetics, they talk about there are patterns in households where everybody gets a manic depressive, or everybody gets certain heart disease, or everybody or a lot of people live in that same vibrational rut. All can get the same illness. And even like we're talking about smallpox with Native Americans, if you believe that some germ is going to get you, you can create that illness. There's a book called The Voodoo of Cancer. And in that book, they had tragic examples where biopsy specimens were mixed up. And like there was a guy that had a mole, and his results went to a guy that had a malignant melanoma. And they said, oh my God, it's a miracle. You didn't have cancer at all. And that guy goes ahead and lives to be, 100. But the guy that had the malignant melanoma, that went to the guy that had the mole. And they said, oh, we just saw as a mole. You've got malignant cancer. And those people can die. And that's what they call the voodoo of cancer. That our thought patterns created the trajectory of our illnesses. So that's why I'm very hopeful. It's New Age medicine is kind of poo-pooed a lot, but about meditation and breathing and thinking, and in addition to a clean lifestyle, we spend probably twice as what most people spend on food because we are trying to get our bodies healthy. Because neither my wife or I grew up with healthy food. I mean, it was terrible. We weren't ghetto children, but still, like as a college student, I was living on Coca-Cola and donuts, for years. I have the fillings to prove it. But, that was that larval stage where you don't know better. And there are people same way, they're pulling themselves out of that rut. And there are people, you go to any health food store and you'll see some of the sickest people you ever saw in your life. One is that they realize modern medicine isn't working for them, which is true, but also people that are obsessed with getting sick get sick. It's called the law of attraction. And if all you think about is, oh, I'm going to get a germ, I got to use these sanitary wipes on everything I touch, I'm wearing a mask, I'm wearing all these different protective devices, that can actually make you sick.
Yeah, you're putting yourself in that mental state.
Mm-hmm.
One more final,
Yeah.
It's not even just a presupposition, but it's, I guess, if you grew up gardening, if you've ever done any kind of gardening, I try to think of examples outside of myself or things that we see on a regular basis, because it just helps to have examples. But I remember one year I did a garden, and it was we were just starting out. So my husband and I were in an apartment or something like that, or a townhome, and I couldn't garden there. So my dad tilled me a lot out at their place, and very it's in River Valley in Minnesota. So very a lot of clay and some loam, mostly a lot of clay. And so I had to amend the soil a lot. And as a result of having to amend the soil, I brought in very fertile soil in order to balance out all the clay content. And fortunately, I had a lot of time to study and really made sure that each plant had its own soil type that it needed. And I planted some cantaloupes, and the instructions were like, or the book that I was reading said, well, melons really like and need a lot of fertilizer. And I had gotten this really rich compost, or I didn't know that at the time, but later I learned, wow, that was really great compost, because I got really terrific melons. If you don't have enough vitamins and nutrients in cantaloupe, it was cantaloupe in particular. If you've ever gone to the store and had a melon in particular and it's just bland, there's no food. There isn't enough nutrients in the soil. Or squashes are really similar.
Yeah.
And I remember bringing some into my parents' house, and they were like, wow, those are really amazing. We've tried growing cantaloupes forever and it never works out. And it was just like, oh, put the pieces of the puzzle together. And so fortunately I didn't have I didn't have any pest issue. Well, I did have that pest issue. I did have baby bunnies that mowed down my row of peas and beans. And so that was the biggest pest issue I had, but I made a deal with them. I said, I'm bringing you in this compost pile. There's fresher compost. You can have all you want out of there. And, but leave my garden alone. And they got the message, and they left it alone. But that was when you have those external experiences of even like if a pest does start taking over your garden and you're like, okay, what am I going to do? I think that external example helps you to see more like how that could apply internally. Of course, like Pottinger's examples of the cats, right? If the mother cat didn't have enough nutrients, of course, she wasn't going to produce an offspring that had enough nutrients to be, not a good tasting cat, but, not like the cantaloupe, but they're not going to be the full version of what they could be. Mm-hmm. And so I think we're missing out sometimes, by just doing those basic things these days.
Well, you brought up a good point, because not only did you get good food, you got to touch the earth, you got to ground yourself.
Yeah.
and that's called earthing. And that's incredibly important for this EMF thing we're talking about spending time barefoot and with your hands in the soil, particularly, or getting in running water. All these things, this earthing really is one of the most healing things you can do. And then growing your own food is the ultimate food. Whatever, it could be one carrot or one tomato plant. If you live in a high-rise condo, you can have pots of dirt on your balcony, and you can make amazing food, and it will change your life. Just to make your own food, taking control of your life. And I can't believe how many people don't have gardens. When I was a kid, my aunts and my grandma, they had like half-acre gardens, and they put up and I work with Amish now and Mennonite and Hutterites. They put up at least half of their food every summer, and they can it, and they live on these tomatoes and potatoes and everything in between. And then all summer they're eating berries and they're eating greens. It's phenomenal. So
we're meant to do it,
yeah, we are hunter-gatherers. Yeah.
Yep, even the exercise, the squatting, the bending, the hauling,
Yeah.
we're meant to move that way. It's pretty
Now
amazing.
that's real. That is real. That all of this, a lot of what we're talking about is like something I read or saw it on the internet or read this book. What's really important is what's real to you, what you've made real, what you've seen with your own eyes. When I eat that, I don't feel good. That's real. That is absolutely real. You don't need a book. When I eat this, I feel fantastic. When I take my shoes off and walk in the soil, man, I just feel so calm and relaxed. That's real. And that's really what I recommend people do with their life is explore what's real rather than somebody else's telling you what's real.
Well, that's a terrific end note to end
Yeah,
on.
it is. And you did it with your garden. I hope you're going to do it this year. I know I am.
Yeah, we have, each year you build a little bit more, you do a little bit more and work on it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, good.
you learn each year too.
Well, thank you, Tara. That was fabulous. You're a good hostess.
Thank you. So where can people learn more about you?
You can go to willwinter.com. There's a little bit, I'm not really much of a web guy, but there's some stuff on there. You can get a hold of me. I do, my real job is consulting for people, especially farmers or ranchers that want to have a holistic approach to their whole farm, rebuild their soil, regenerate the soil, make themselves healthy. Right now, I'm kind of obsessed with this structured water, helping people figure out how to structure their own water. I'm very concerned about the environmental pollution we have from EMF. Very concerned that people not go to the garden store and get weed killer or insecticides. Just get those out of your house. Get as much EMF out of your house as you can. Turn your router and modem off at night. Keep it far away from you. Don't use any Bluetooth device. Use wired devices. You can't see it, but I've got wires up now on my mouse and my keyboard, staying far away from it. Keep your cell phone in a case that's a shielding case. Never put your cell phone up to your head. Try to get rid of the cell phone if you can. Those cordless wall phones are terrible. They're equally toxic. So just all those things you can do is to get poisons out of your house. Don't use a microwave oven. Do as natural as you can with all of your food. Spend money on food, not the doctor. Buy the best food you can possibly get. And even monetarily, that will come back to you because you're going to think better. You're going to make more money. You're going to be happier. You're going to need less medical drugs. And it's creating your own health. And that's really, there's nothing more powerful than that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Great tips to end on as well. Thank